we are talking about incident response. So, if you've ever been someone who's been interested in blue teaming, or I'm just going to save that. Thank you, Keith, for saying that. I'm just going to save that background real quick. If any of you have ever been interested in blue teaming or being an incident response, or potentially like being a cybersecurity engineer, cybersecurity analyst on the responding side, this is the class for you. Now, when it comes to incident response, we have to break a couple of things down. This class is mainly going to focus on like just the overall incident response process, as well as breaking down incident management, right? Because this entire class here, we're going to break down a lot of things that are important to that, such as what is the definition of a security event, right? So there's an event, there is an incident, and then there's an alert. We'll break all those down bit by bit. I'll tell you what though, the definition for incident response in and of itself, let me just zoom in because you all like that. The definition for a security incident is, or for incident response, is the process of identifying, managing, and mitigating security breaches. That is the entire definition. We will break down all the steps that come into incident response, but the key reason why identifying comes first is because you have to qualify an incident in order to respond to it. And then there's a concept of incident management. If incident response is identifying, managing, and mitigating a security breach, well, then incident management is the coordination and communication of the incident response. That means all the things on the back end. Incident response is, hey, we have a breach. These are the things we do. Incident management says, okay, we've had a breach. These are the ways that we're going to communicate the breach. These are the ways we're going to document the breach. This is the chain of command on who needs to make decisions. These are the people who have been in contact with, let's say, a computer or a workstation that was breached. All right. And then we'll kind of break down a lot of these other terminologies, such as CSIRT. Now, if you are unfamiliar with this, this just stands for Computer Security Incident Response Team. I'll be referencing this a lot. A lot of people call it CSIRT, just like as an acronym. Keep in mind that some people say cybersecurity as opposed to computer security. They're interchangeable. But anytime you hear me say CSIRT, that's what I'm talking about. Now, the reason why this is a course, a class that we need to go through, is because it is one of the most important things in a cybersecurity professional's career to understand how to respond to an event. Like I've said time and time again in class, it's not if you get hacked, it's when. So if we as cybersecurity professionals become so technology dependent, we lose to respond to incidences properly. That is one thing AI cannot do. Sure, AI can isolate a computer or a network, but in order to make decisions on what to do next or discover what exactly is the threat, a human needs to be involved. So in this class, we're essentially going to learn what incident response versus incident management is. We'll talk about the CSIRTs and what exactly that looks like, the different phases and parts of incident response plan, as well as analysis and post-incident work. So, defining a couple terms here. There are the terms I mentioned before, which are events, alerts, and incidences, right? So the definition of an event is any sort of activity that happens on a network. This can be something such as someone opening an email, someone trying to log in, or someone going to a website that they shouldn't go on. Let's say, for example, you work at a big company and they don't allow you to get on Facebook. That's an example of an event. An event is not malicious or potentially bad in nature. Okay, it's just a thing that happens on a network, just and on a daily basis. good nor bad. But if you see that an event is happening more often, for example, I used login attempts before. If you're seeing that someone is logging in, trying to log into a site 1,000 times a second, you're thinking, okay, that looks very suspicious. That is what we call an alert. Now, alerts can be false positives. They can be such a thing as someone trying to log in like 5 times, but they keep hitting enter on accident. So it could be a false positive. It could be like something that isn't real per se. However, if you do qualify that something is real, well, then it becomes an incident. An incident is a verified event or a series of events that indicate a security breach or a threat. Now, I do want to mention something here. An incident can also be quote unquote minor. An incident would be considered, hey, someone was sending an email internally and it was meant to go to HR, but it went to a sales director. Okay, that is still considered an incident because there has been a breach of data. Maybe that HR file had some social security number on it or whatnot, right? So that is still considered a security incident. Now, when you're working with these different terms, a lot of the times when you will see these terms come through is something that we call a SOC, S-O-C. SOC stands for Security Operations Center. Now, these Security Operations Center are pretty cool. Security Operations Center. And the one that I used to work in was really neat. I don't know if they have them anymore, but this is kind of like what it looks like. If you can see here, let me click into this so that you can see. So a security operations center is literally that, where you have multiple people on the computer and they're pretty much staring at a really big screen where they typically put up, hey, this is the status of all of our automations, all of our systems, this is the status of our network. And they say, we're having an attack here. It's literally an operations center where they go through any type of incidents. I used to work at a company called Rook Security, and they used to have this really, really cool security operations center. I don't know if that's still around today. Aha, so this is the exact image that was on the site when I first joined the company. So this is a security operations center. This guy, his name is Daniel. He is a genius, absolute genius. But these are, and Wei as well, these are some of our security operations center guys. They actually do some of the things that we are going to talk about today. And this was a combination of, I think it's 12 different monitors. And here you see all of the hacks that are happening all at once. This one is just a website that pull up, but when we're actually running through an incident, they actually show all of the servers that are being hit to our clients. So in this place, this is typically like this was a really, really big bullpen. And then there was like a staircase that went around and everyone could see into it. It was a really, really cool. So that's what we call a security operations center. That's where you'll hear these terms thrown around a lot of the time. More often than not, when you become a cybersecurity professional, like at the beginning, you'll be called what we call a security analyst. The security analyst would sit in the security operations center and they do what we call triage. The triage is the process of evaluating if an alert is false positive or an actual positive, and then you determine the severity, and then you respond based on its priority. So security analysts typically do the triage process. Now, when you are asking questions about if this is a false positive or false negative, you have to ask these questions. Whose account was used? Where did the logon occur? What was the account being used for? You need to ask questions such as, has the account been suspicious before? These are all questions that you want to get answers to, because these are the things you'll need to document. We'll talk about more of documentation later because that's what falls into incident management. Check the chat here. Event plus event plus event plus alert plus event plus alert equals incident. That is correct. But sometimes, yep, Oibek is correct. Sometimes an event can occur without. Yes. Yes, sometimes it can occur without an alert. All right, let me see if I miss anything else here. Events are just mentioned in the log, correct? Yes. Great question. Saida, great question as well. Okay, so let's talk about the difference between incident response and incident management. Now, I already gave a precursor to that earlier on, right? Because an incident response is focused on the technical actions you take in order to stop and fix an actual breach. So you've gone through the process of validating, oh, we have an actual breach. It is an incident. Now we need to respond to it. So these are the actions you take to respond and fix the breach. Incident management is the overall coordination and communication during an incident. As you can imagine, take a moment for a second. Pretend that you are the owner of a multi-million-dollar company. And all of a sudden, you hear, hey, we've had a breach. Then your first question is, what was the breach? How much money did we lose? Are they still in our system? A lot of these questions are going to evoke emotion. The emotion tends to be panic. So what incident management does, it turns that panic into a system. I like to think of it as it channels that panic energy into efficiency and response, because you can't respond to an incident appropriately without a proactive system in order to do so. That's why in incident response, there are a lot of things that you need to do in order to prepare for an incident. It's never if you get hacked, it's when. So if you know that you're going to get hacked at some point, well, then you kind of owe it to yourself to prepare ahead of time. Well, what are some things that you can do ahead of time in order to be fully prepared? Well, one of them is something that we've talked about in the class before, which is an EDR. EDR stands for Endpoint Detection and Response. This is essentially a software that gets put on your end device, such as your laptop or your workstation, and it detects and investigates any sort of suspicious activity on an endpoint or on your computer. Oh, we're being asked to zoom out. Sure, I'll go back one. There we go. We'll meet in the middle. We'll meet in the middle. Okay, moving forward here. When it comes to EDRs, a very simple example is a lot of companies do not allow people to plug in a USB. So plugging in that USB, the EDR will automatically detect that someone's trying to plug in a USB and they're trying to potentially steal information. So it would automatically detect that. It would either stop it immediately by just disabling it. It should be disabled already, but in case it's not, and it would send an alert of some sort. Speaking of alerts, one of the things we talked about in class so often is a SIEM. Now, this is something you need to memorize and understand what exactly a SIEM is. A SIEM is a security information and event management system. All it is it's a single system or a single entity of some sort that collects and analyzes data, whether that's log data, whether that's security events, everything that to kind of detect if there are any threats or not. Now, a SIEM is really important because without a SIEM, you could have 4 different tools that does the same exact thing that a SIEM does. Now, if a SIEM, it takes everything into one. Log analysis is just a part of what a SIEM does, but it also looks at all of the alerts. It looks at all of the events that happen on our network, and then it qualifies the event, whether it is an actual threat or not, based off a series of algorithms that give it a green check mark of this is an actual threat, or hey, this is not a threat, it's a false positive. We've seen it happen before. Something as simple as, hey, this user has typed in their password wrong on their end station maybe like twice a week, right? So once they do that often, they'll say, well, this is most likely a false positive. Now, of course, it'll investigate it in case there's anything odd, but that's the type of thing that the SIEM can do. and it kind of learns. Then there's something that we call digital forensics. Now, when digital forensics comes into play, if you're getting an alert, well then you're like, okay, this is saying, hey, there's an issue, but that's the only sentence that comes up. There's an issue. You have to do digital forensics to understand what exactly the issue is. Digital forensics is the process of analyzing digital evidence, such as a computer, to understand how a breach happened. Now, if you hear the term forensics, typically you'll think of something as like a crime scene. That is exactly it. If you've ever watched a crime movie, there's a forensic team that comes in, they take pictures, they try to collect as much evidence as they can. Typically, you will see someone get a computer. If it's like, if there's one fire, they'll take a computer, like, hey, can we recover anything? That is digital forensics. That's trying to do an analysis and a recovery to find out what exactly happened during the breach. All right, so I'm going to make an executive decision on the Zoom here. I'm going to zoom in once. You all have access to this, so you can read it on your own. So you can go ahead and check that out. What would happen while monitoring the network? An alert came of an employee inserting USB. What would be the procedure in that case? Peter, that's a great question. More often than not, your USB capabilities would be automatically turned off. Remember, this is one of the things that a lot of companies do by default. They disable it, and then people have to request USB access in order for it to function. So more often than not, it would automatically be disabled. Now, if it wasn't disabled for whatever reason, you have an EDR, an endpoint detection and response software on your computer, it would automatically disable it if it wasn't supposed to be on, and it would alert someone. That's most likely what would happen. All right, so we talked about digital forensics, right? Let's carry on here. Da, 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 da. Now, with digital forensics, something to note is that typically this comes in the form of a hard drive. Now, digital forensics, you can recover hard drive information or memory because when you delete information on your hard drive, it doesn't completely get deleted. Okay, you need to go through a series of steps to fully delete it. Sure, it deletes it, but you need to have some really sophisticated forensic software in order to get it back. And then what digital forensics also does, it reviews logs. So it'll find, like, whenever you do anything on your computer logs that information of what exactly you did. So you as a digital forensics can review the logs and trace back to where exactly the attack happened. Whether that attack happened because they clicked a USB or maybe they clicked a phishing email, those are all examples of digital forensics. Now, this is all in relation to incident response. Remember, incident response is taking the actions to recover or find out what happened in a breach. Incident management is the process of communication, of the procedures, of making sure that we know what to do when we know, like, the steps to take during an incident. That involves making sure we have a communication plan, knowing who if an incident has happened, who do we reach out to, who takes point, who makes decisions, who do we need to keep involved in this conversation to make sure that they are aware, both internally and externally. Not only are we trying to communicate to these people, but we're also needing to update the severity of the incident. The CEO probably wants to know what happened. And then we also want to know, who do we need to engage in order to fix this? Can we fix it ourselves? Do we need to hire an external blue team? Or do we need to communicate with the legal team? Is the breach big enough that the legal team has to be involved and we have to answer to some people that might say, hey, you were in breach of this law? Now, not only that, but you also need to document everything. So, and anytime an incident happens, most of the time, there's going to be someone taking screenshots. And whenever you take a screenshot, you always want to include the upper right-hand corner or the lower left or right-hand corner that shows the date and time. Because what will happen is people say, okay, when did this start? what did you do at this time, and then when did it end? There's a time element with incident response. So you need to make sure that you have that documented properly. We'll talk about incident response plan a little later because that's associated with incident management, but not just that, we also need to talk about what happens after the incident. So incident management also is in relation to what did you do after the breach? If I were to summarize the differences between incident response and incident management, it's very simple. Response are the actions that you take, the hands-on technical work. The management is the coordination and orchestration of the team that's doing the work. So such as updates, communication, documentation. That's all it is. The incident management enables the incident response to run smoothly and cover all the bases. So now that you have an understanding of incident response, well, what exactly do you need to do in order to build the proper incident response for your organization? Well, the first thing is preparing the people. One of the first things you need to do is you need to make sure that the people are aware of what you're doing and that they're aware that there's a team that is responsible for this, okay? So not only do you need to train your employees on how exactly to spot some security threats, such as a phishing email or social engineering, but you have to train them to be able to recognize suspicious activity. A lot of companies overlook this. They think that it's just an annoying thing that happens and they don't want to have their employees waste their time doing that. It isn't until an incident happens that they say, oh my goodness, we really needed our employees to be trained on this. So you always want to emphasize, hey, training is important. It's not just something where you tick a box. Excuse me, it is actually something that is helpful. So you want to prepare your people. The next thing you want to do is you want to build an actual CSIRT. Remember, CSIRT stands for Cybersecurity Incident Response Team. Excuse me. This means this is a cross-functional team, meaning that's multiple departments that are put together to respond to a cybersecurity incident. One of the questions you might ask is, why does it need to be multiple departments? Why can't it just be the IT team or the cybersecurity team? Well, the reason is if the incident involves personal data, well, then the legal team has to be involved. If the information or the breach is related to employee data, such as social security numbers being breached, HR has to be involved. Now, if it has to do with, let's say, a website defacement attack, well, then marketing team has to be involved. There are multiple team members or multiple departments that need to play a role in how you respond to the incident. So that's why we have a CSIRT. Now, the CSIRT does need to have technical leads, meaning they need to have engineers, they need to have cybersecurity professionals, they need to have IT professionals that are going to be able to assist if an incident were to happen. But not just that, more often than not, I've seen that CEOs and C-suite executives, they want to at least be notified. They want to get a summary at least every hour or every 2 hours or something like that, okay? So these are from a strategy standpoint. So because they're the decision makers that they can help move that forward. Something else that a lot of people overlook is the fact that if a breach happens, let's say you're a public company, you're being traded on the market, well, then you have 3 days after an incident happens to report it. So during those 3 days, typically you'll have public relations team that goes in and helps with the messaging. That means that they control how the company looks. It's to save face or make the company not look as bad, okay? Now, with the CSIRT, these are multiple different team members that have different layers or different responsibilities, okay? And they need to have clear permissions and clear roles on what to do in the case of an emergency. Now, they have to be ready at any single point in time, which is why the SOC, Security Operations Center, runs 24 hours. More often, you'll see like there's a day team and a night team. And both of these teams also have like on calls. This is what I used to do. I used to work for the SOC and I did incident response. So I got calls at like 2 in the morning. I'll get calls during dinner, and then I'll have to go into the office. These were like this was an important job to do, and I have to admit I learned a lot. However, it is taxing. So if you are planning to do that, know that that is going to be a something that'll probably happen. Now, don't worry, the paycheck is really, really, really nice. So I'm not complaining. However, just know that that's the expectation if you do get on the CSIRT team. Now, something else about CSIRTs that some people don't really talk about is this is all about proactivity. You want to make sure that you have a CSIRT in place before an incident actually happens, okay? So that being said, who exactly is on the CSIRT team? Well, in pretty simple terms, it's team leads. So you want to make sure your engineering team lead is on, your IT team lead is on. As a manager or as an analyst? If you're asking me, I was kind of like an in-between. I was called what you call a cybersecurity project manager. So I was a senior person, but I wasn't managing those people directly. However, if I said, hey, we're doing this, well, then what I said carried weight. We call that a dotted line. So you have the team leads, and then you have communication specialists. So this would be such as like the public relations people I mentioned, or anyone that's going to handle internal or external communication. Then you have a lead investigator. So I would say that my role on the CSIRT was this and some, because I let the technical team do their thing, but then I controlled, hey, we need to let the CEO know, we need to let this director know, hey, get on the phone with this legal team member and tell them we got breached and that we need to know how much time we have, or if the data that has been breached is putting us in legal hot water. So that's what legal representation is for. And then we have analysts and researchers. This is where I said a SOC analyst is typically what people go into. Researchers, these are essentially they are supporting the investigators. So the lead investigator, they do the primary investigations, they look through all the data and whatnot, and then these guys, the analysts and researchers, actually support them. And then you have the executive sponsor. The executive sponsor would be either the CIO, the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, or the CIO. Typically, it's a C-level executive that has a vested interest in the actual breach itself. Typically, it'd be the CISO, then the CISO reports to the CEO. So when you have these team members in place, then you have to say, okay, now we need to come up with a plan. So what you have to do is you have to give all of them different, very clear responsibilities and very clear roles. All of them have to understand what they do and what they don't do. You do not, and I repeat this very loudly, you do not want the lead investigator or any of the analysts doing communication internally or externally. That's why we leave that role to someone such as me, because I get to say, hey, we're not going to say anything until we have these answers, okay? So typically the team lead is the one who kind of like keeps everyone aligned, make sure that everyone knows what they're doing, that they're staying in their lane, and they're the ones who report to the execs. Then the communication specialists, they're the ones who talk to the media, talk to the stakeholders. They're communicating externally and internally to make sure that everyone is receiving the same information. And typically it has to go through a public relations specialist. The lead investigator does the technical work, analysts and researchers support them, and then the legal team kind of like gives advice. And the executive sponsor are the ones who get the actual information and they make decisions as well as do funding for the entire team. Funding means doing trainings and sessions. So when you fund a team, you want to make sure that they're as prepared as possible for a specific incident. So you want to make sure that they're well equipped, they have all the programs, they have all the training they need, and they have all of these simulations that they've done before, anything that prepares them for an incident. Now, this is important because without preparation, without trainings, well, then it can become kind of a nightmare if an incident happens because you don't exactly know, hey, What do I do in this scenario? As new in this career, what is best for us to be on a team? Which position? What's your recommendation? So, Alex, that really depends because I would say if you want to learn everything from the base knowledge of cybersecurity, becoming a SOC analyst, like we're talking about here, offers that. It gives you all that information. However, if you're also someone who wants to work in maybe not technical like this, but you want to work in, let's say, compliance, well, then GRC analyst is also an option. Being a privacy analyst is also an option. Or you could work in risk management. We'll talk about risk management in about 2 weeks or so. I'll explain what that career is. So to answer that question, I would say this. If everyone sitting here right now is wondering what entry-level role should I get into, do these 3 things. The first thing is pay attention to what we're talking about in class and find out what you're most interested in. Find out what you're most interested in. Are you interested in red team? Are you interested in blue team? Are you interested in privacy? Are you interested in compliance? Find out where you're like, oh, this is really interesting stuff. I want to learn more. Then look at the skills that you have now that are not cybersecurity related. What are those skills? Are you thinking, am I a really good communicator? Am I a really good project manager? Am I very technical? Am I good with computers? Do I know websites? Do I know how to code? You look at those skills and you look at what you're interested in, and then you combine them for the third thing. You look at all of the cybersecurity jobs that exist out there, and you find out, you dwindle out, you swipe left or right on which one is most you think you would be a best fit for. Now, that does require you to pay attention and to what we're talking about and find your interest. So I think the easiest way is to pinpoint your interest first and then kind of do the rest from there. Is automation and orchestration involved in all of this? Peter, that is a great question. So yes, it is involved in the incident response process in a way, but we'll answer that later on. I promise. Hang on to that question. All right. Now, what are some of the best practices for a CSIRT team to have? Well, this is essentially talking about making sure that the team has the right skills, that they are prepared, and that they're able to respond to an incident as quickly and efficiently as possible. Why is that important? Because time is money in the case of a security incident. Because then any time that you're not making progress or not fixing the issue could be time where the hacker dives deeper into your network and you might lose additional money. So one of the first things to do is you want to get very clear on the roles and responsibilities that I've mentioned. Now, if you want to do the opposite, that would be total confusion. You want to avoid that confusion by assigning roles to each person in advance. You do not assign the role during an incident. They should already know what the role is. All you have to do is remind them accordingly. Then you have to set up what we call an escalation path. An escalation path is saying, okay, these are the people that are working on this incident. They're typically by seniority. And then along that line are people that have to make tough decisions in case of an incident. For example, one of the first things you want to do if an incident happens is you want to identify it and then you want to isolate it, right? So if the isolation requires the website to go down and you switch it live to another server, or if it will interrupt some purchases, well, then someone is going to have to say, I'm going to make that tough decision to protect everyone else or to protect the rest of our network. And then you need to have, so you have clear roles and responsibilities, and then you need to have a really good IRP. We'll talk about an IRP later on, so I'm going to skip that for now. The way I will summarize it is it's an incident response plan. It's essentially a documented playbook that gives you step-by-step processes on what to do during an incident. Think of it as this. It's like a fire escape plan. If there's a fire, you know not to use the elevator. You know that you should take the stairs. So there's a documented list of what you need to do in order to handle the incident. Then there's continuous training and development. That just means that you're continually training your team to be able to respond to things a lot better. The skills development piece, this can be associated with something that we call a tabletop exercise, and making sure we're keeping up with the new tools and threats that are out there. We'll talk about this later on in this class. The other one is proactive threat intelligence. someone was asking me, does automation and orchestration work here? Yes, you can use automation and orchestration to do proactive threat intelligence and proactive threat hunting, because then you can essentially get all of the threats before they can become an incident. This is where risk management comes in, where you find out where the deficiencies or where the weaknesses are before they become exploited. Same thing when it comes to efficient incident detection and response. These two things can play really well with each other, because when you have really good detection and response, meaning that you're continually monitoring everything from logs, network traffic, endpoints, everything there, it can really make life a lot easier by automating that entire process. Because then you can automate, if there is an actual incident, then you can automate the response to that. And then there's collaboration and communication. I mentioned how important it is to have the right people in mind. However, something that most people don't talk about is the channel in which to communicate. So some people might say, oh, we need to get everyone on a call right now. Well, what you want to do in an incident, the first thing you want to do is you have to make sure you know where everyone goes to get information. That's one of the first things you need to make sure people know. More often than not, it is the chat channel. When an incident happens, someone from the CSIRT will create a channel, will add all the necessary people, and that's where all the information will be kept. That's where everyone will communicate so that it is fully documented. I've been on a lot of these, and sometimes there are up to thousands of people on that Slack channel. I'm talking thousands, because each one of those people needs to be involved or at least be aware. And that's where real-time updates happen. I remember how I was talking about post-incident documentation. So this is where that comes in. Post-incident documentation is where we kind of like break down, okay, after an incident, we need to hold a debrief, and that that debrief can also be called a post-mortem. That means, okay, we solved it, it happened, we're good now. Let's talk about what we did well, what we didn't do well, what worked, what didn't, and kind of like document the timelines, actions, and essentially lessons learned. The entire idea here is to do a retro and say, these are the things that we did really well. These are the things we need to improve. It typically comes in like a column. I think I have a lessons learned template out there somewhere. I'll look for it. And then there's continuous improvement. So using the lessons learned to understand, hey, what didn't work? How can we improve it? The idea is that if something didn't work during one incident, it does not repeat. If it repeats itself, you'll have to answer the question of, why didn't we fix that before? And that's a tough question to answer. Then comes compliance. So with compliance, we're talking about if there was private information that was released, if there was industry information that was released, if there were any contracts that were broken because of the breach, well then what do we have to do in order to stay in compliance? Is a CSIRT team leader the same as a CISO? Sometimes. So sometimes, depending on how big your company is, the CISO may be directly involved in the incident response. However, more often than not, it's the security operations center leader. It's the incident response leader. They're typically like one or two positions below the actual CISO themselves. Now, the CISO and the C-suite team, they hire these people to do the incident response because they trust them. And so more often than not, the CISO doesn't get directly involved. But I've seen some of them get involved just because they want to get their hands dirty and do a lot of additional work. Resource allocation and scalability. So what this means is we want to make sure that you have the right people, the right tech, and the right budget to respond at scale. So if, let's say, your CFO, your chief financial officer says, hey, we're losing money, we need to cut some resources. I want to cut resources in the incident response team because we haven't had an incident in over 4 years. Well, that puts us at a disadvantage, because if an incident does happen and you only have 2 incident response people, that's not good. That's going to cost even more money because we weren't able to respond quickly enough. So making sure that you're prioritizing the security team and you have the right resources, both financially and employee related, sets you up for success. You also want to plan for growth. The idea is that not only do you want to plan for growth as a company, but threats are going to keep growing. So with the more threats that come, well, then you want to grow your team accordingly. AI professionals and AI subject matter experts, SMEs, are becoming really, really big in demand right now because AI is becoming bigger. So that is one of the ways that you have to plan accordingly and be able to scale. Okay, then the next topic is something that you all have heard me talk about so much, and that is documentation. Now, documentation is one of the most important things in cybersecurity because it is vital for legal, it's vital for forensics, and it's vital for the post-incident activities, meaning we need to know what happened and we need to write it down. It needs to be listed somewhere because it's very important for us to know what exactly happened and the timelines associated with it. Now, that's what all the incident documentation is. It's just making sure we write down what exactly happened. Then there's something that we call an incident response policy. The incident response policy is essentially a document that outlines that outlines the organization's approach to handling an incident. Mustafa asks, no incidences? That's not a problem. We can have no. Excuse me. All right. Then we have an IRP, which stands for the Incident Response Plan. So again, this is a detailed operational playbook that lists out the actual steps that need to take in order to handle the incident. This is really important because if you've ever run into a situation that was not well planned and that was pretty chaotic, people are saying, hey, I don't know what to do. Who do I reach out to? What do I do? The incident response plan attacks that by saying an incident is happening. This is what you do. You open up this Slack channel, you involve these people, you notify these people. Next thing you do is you identify the actual threat itself, you isolate it, and you follow down those steps. Now, we'll break all those down later on. Now, when you see incident response plan and incident response playbooks, these can be synonymous. A lot of people tend to kind of like use these two in the same way because an incident response playbook can also be an incident response plan. The technical term here is that a playbook is one specific book or one specific section for one specific incident. There is an incident response playbook for something like an earthquake because that is an incident that would impact employees. Okay, now that goes into crisis management, but that playbook is for that. There's a playbook for a malware attack. There's a playbook for social engineering. There's a playbook for a phishing attack. All of these are different playbooks that can be put into play and activated if that specific scenario is taking place. Then you have an SOP. SOP stands for Standard Operating Procedure. It's essentially like a list of instructions for tasks like triage and evidence handling that is essentially like the things that you would do in order to address the situation. Okay. Let me see if I missed anything here. Now, something to note about an SOP. Remember, I mentioned that stakes are high. Emotions are high when an incident takes place because everyone's like, oh no, we're having a security incident. What's going to happen? Are we in trouble? So people are scared. They have, it evokes a lot of emotion. So an SOP, it has to be an easy to understand instructional book that anyone can read under pressure. I've created SOPs that have literally just been a big white paper with a really big white text that says, reach out to this person, email, phone number. If this person isn't available, reach out to this person. If this person is available, reach out to this person. After you do that, make sure to document what you saw happen, write it out in the Slack channel, and it's really, really big and bold and just like one page, because it is easy for someone to read and say, okay, pull up the SOP. We're having an incident. Our website is being hacked. What do? Okay, I have to reach out to Andre. Great, I reached out to him. I have to document what I did. Okay, I'm going to the Slack channel. I write out exactly what I saw happen. And I need to include this, so on and so forth. Then you need to have communication templates. Now, a communication template is essentially like a pre-written alert or press release or internal memos that you can just input the actual details into. It saves a lot of time and it makes things a lot more efficient, followed by incident response forms. This is just a standardized form that gives us information or documentation about the actual incident. Evidence handling guidelines is just a list of guidelines that you have to follow in handling evidence. It's kind of like any crime case. There's something called a chain of custody, which says, hey, this person held on to this piece of evidence at this time, then they hand it to this person, so on and so forth. It also has forensic imaging steps, which we'll talk about later, as well as secure storage requirements, meaning anything that is evidence has to be stored in a secure environment that is under lock and key. And then training materials. So with incident response, everyone needs to get trained on incident response in order to do it well. So that's why you need to make sure that you have the right handbooks, the right flow charts, the right testing scenarios. You need to have fundamentals covered so that everyone knows what to do in that scenario. Okay? So when it comes to documentation, why this is so important, think of documentation as a team's GPS during chaos. So the documentation sets a clear line of sight of this is where we need to go so that you're not navigating like completely in the dark. All right, let's do a little pause here. I don't know if you all can tell, but I have done a lot of this. So that's why we're going a little fast. Oh, hey, Mohammed. Hi, Mary. Hi, Wayne. All right, so let's go ahead and take a 15-minute break. Let me put a duck time.
I'm going to record this announcement before giving it back to Andre. So regarding the CSC, their services are currently on pause, but they will be back in August. And we will be confirming the exact dates with you soon. Thanks so much for your patience. But if you need any help with LinkedIn or your resume, feel free to check out our materials and recording in the training site. And if you need like more personalized support, you can reach out to Farah. She will be more than happy to help. And that's it for today. That's the announcement for the CSC. I will check out if we have a winner today, and we are back with Andre.
All right. Let's go ahead and continue. Okay. So we had just talked about how important documentation was. Now let's talk about the actual, excuse me, incident response preparation. So when it comes to incident response preparation, you'll notice that these are the incident response steps. We'll actually talk about that a little later, but when it comes to preparation, one of the things that you need to do is you want to first identify the key stakeholders. Why is this important? Because when you identify the key stakeholders, well, then you can then develop what we call a contact tree. The contact tree is usually like a tree diagram where you see who needs to be in the know in the case of an incident. So when you identify those stakeholders, well, then you're able to kind of work backwards from there. Now, obviously, one of the stakeholders who you'll have will be the CEO, because they will most likely have a vested interest in if the incident is going to impact the entire company as a whole, or if it'll be a little bit minuscule. The other thing you need to do is you need to create an IRP, an incident response plan. We'll break that down a little more later. Not only do you have to create it, but you have to continually update it. The more incidents you have, well, then the more updates you'll need to make sure that you're staying up with the times, that you're addressing any of the gaps that you didn't do well during the actual incident. And then you'll have to do specific exercise to get your team ready. Now, these exercises can be something as simple as a tabletop exercise. A tabletop exercise is just like everyone sits at a table, and then someone, this is what I did, was I would say, okay, thank you everyone for being here. We're going to run a simulation or a scenario in case an incident were to happen. No one is actually going to do anything on their computer, but we want them to vocalize what they would do. The reason why tabletop exercise is important is because then we get to test the awareness or the knowledge of the different team members on how well, what they know on the incident response process. And then you can also do what we call cyber games. Cyber games are a simulated attack, a live simulated attack, to where you're saying, hey, we're getting attacked right now. Here is your computer, and you get to decide what we do. There are a lot of companies out there that do a great job of kind of running through cyber war games, but these are two exercises that you can do to get a handle on your team's ability to and respond to certain instances, as well as keep them fresh and top of mind. The other two things that you can do is do some additional threat hunting to make sure that you get ahead of the incidences. Obviously, the best thing to do is not to have an incident at all. So mitigating that is one of the best ways to not have that incident, as well as essentially developing new alert rules. Now, something that hasn't really been listed is using the NIST incident response process. I'll copy this link. I'll put it in here. You can look at that. Something else, if you're interested, you can also look at the CompTIA incident response lifecycle. So these are the steps that the CompTIA says to follow. They'll have different names. For example, the one that we have is preparation, identification, containment. This one is preparation, detection, analysis, containment. They're all kind of like the same, except they follow kind of like a different format per se. Okay, so these are the ways that you can prepare. Now, the big fish here is the IRP. The IRP in this case is called incident response plan. Now, the incident response plan is essentially your plan to handle an incident from start to finish. Everything from clearly defining the roles, the tools, the actions that need to take place, the steps, all of these are the specific things that need to happen in order for the incident to be completely handled from top down. Now, why is this important? Because the incident response plan is your playbook. It's your go-to in case something were to happen. The benefit of the incident response plan is it outlines the steps pretty clearly so that no one can say, I didn't know what to do. That is the worst thing you can hear during an incident, is someone saying, I didn't know what to do. Because we as cybersecurity professionals have to build these out. We spend time and energy to make them as efficient as possible. So it's important that they get adopted by the team. Now, what does getting adopted by the team mean? Well, not only is the creation of the IRP important, but it's important that the rest of the organization knows that there's an IRP, but also what the IRP contains. The best way to get them to kind of get like skin in the game is to get executive buy-in. Executive buy-in typically means that you're getting a C-suite executive, whether that's a CISO, CEO, CIO, any of those high-level decision makers, to approve and like say, hey, this is a good thing that we want in our company. If they approve that, well, then it's good to go. Without that buy-in, well, then the plan won't really have much weight to it. Another form of buy-in is having the CEO or the C-suite publicly in front of the entire company say, hey, we have an IRP developed by the incident response team, and everyone should be aware of it. Everyone should read it. Here is the link. What that does is it's like the CEO is kind of like advertising it, or they're saying, I believe in this thing. I think you all should also believe in it as well. That's very, very powerful. So that's what executive buy-in means. Then you need to confirm roles and responsibilities. We talked about how important roles and responsibilities are, right? That means that we need to clarify who's the lead, who they report to, or who do we have to report to, and who makes the big decisions. These are important things to note so that we can create the appropriate channels of communication. Now, as you can imagine, there may be times where those people might not be available. There was a time when a company I was at, the CEO was completely unreachable. So we had to defer to our CISO to make a really big decision. So you need to have backups for each of the roles in case of absences. More often than not, there is like the main decision maker, the main person that needs to make the decision. Then there's backup, and then there's backup, and then there's their backup, like 4 layers. All of those backups have to be aware of what position of the backup they're in and how they can be reached, because all these people are big decision makers. So you make sure that you have uh, clearly defined roles, clearly defined responsibilities, so everyone knows what to do when, and then everyone stays in their lane. In an incident, everyone needs to stay in their lane to make sure that they're not crossing borders or doing too much. An example is if there's a crisis and multiple people are making multiple Slack rooms in order to talk about that crisis or that incident, no one knows where the true room is. So there's a bunch of coordination that happens. Having to say, hey, everyone, this room is going to be closed. This is the main room. That's why clearly defined roles are important. Then you need to document critical assets. The documentation of critical assets has to come before an incident even happens. This is one of the most important things when it comes to proactive planning, because we need to understand what is most valuable to our company. And that's going to be different for different industries. As a medical company, it's the patient information. If you're a financial company and you're storing payment details, it's those payment details. If you're a company like a SaaS company and you're storing a lot of customer data, it's that customer database, that database server. These are all what we call critical assets that need to have multiple layers of protection. And you need to identify those assets so that you can protect them accordingly. Now, the process of identifying those assets is also giving them a numerical value. You need to be able to evaluate the cost of if that asset were to be breached, if that asset were to be stolen. You need to talk to legal, you need to talk to IT team, say what is the damage if we have an incident and involves one of those critical assets. Then you need to come up with what I call a communication plan. So the communication plan goes like this. You're like, okay, we need a way to communicate about the incident so we understand what is happening. What is the platform we're going to communicate on? More often than not, we always suggest Slack, or we say Zoom. We say, all right, if we need to have a meeting right now, we need to go onto a Zoom. We need to have, if the incident is happening, well, then we need to create a Slack room. Everyone goes there. Who initiates the call if the leader is offline? If the leader is offline, you go down the totem pole of the backups. Who talks to the execs or the regulars? Who's the person who communicates to them? Remember how I said there's one person in charge of internal and external communication? Well, that would be that person. That needs to be predefined before an incident happens. You do not want to be on a call and say, okay, who's going to communicate? And then everyone kind of just sits there because they don't want the responsibility of potentially saying, I'm going to talk to the CEO. And if I say something wrong or if I mess up, it's my head on the chopping block. Then you need to draft core communications in advance. You don't want to send an email to the CEO and draft it up from scratch. Instead, you want to have examples of what to send to them. You say, dear CEO, there was an event that happened on date where blank server was impacted for blank. It started at blank time on this date, and blank employee was the one who discovered it, and these were the steps that they took. Having a templated response enables you just to input the information and then send it without needing to come up with a bunch of something directly from scratch. Okay. Now, this is not just internally to the stakeholders. These templated responses should also be like a data breach public notice or maybe a ransomware alert to clients. If you've ever received an email that said, hey, we want to let you know that our databases have been breached. However, these were the steps that we took, and this is how your data is protected, and these are the things we're doing to protect it moving forward. Those can be templated responses that have been prepared ahead of time by the PR team and by the legal team to make sure to still do their required task of informing you, the client, that they've been breached, but also protecting the company and not taking like full liability or what have you. Both of these options do two things. They save you time from needing to write a lot of information, and they reduce panic. When you reduce panic, that means that people are a lot more calm. When you give people information proactively or consistently, it's so much better than those people receiving no information at all. Then you need to go ahead and conduct drills. So this would be like a fire drill, except for cybersecurity. Instead of an actual fire saying, hey, this is a cybersecurity alert, and we need to go ahead and respond to this as if it's an actual incident. This is important because more often than not, only the director and the CISO will know that it's a drill so that they can see how their employees actually respond to an incident. Now, some people might be annoyed to say, well, why is this happening? It's annoying. Like, we know what to do. There is no other way to measure the effectiveness or any of the weak spots of an incident if you don't do these drills. It kind of helps like find the gaps so that you can address it accordingly. And then you want to socialize the charter to the team. The word socialize is just making the rest of the organization aware of what that plan is. That means that you're telling to the entire company, not just IT, not just legal, but you're telling the entire company, hey, this is our CSIRT team, this is our CSIRT charter, this is our incident response plan, and these, you all should be aware of it or at least be able to read it so that you know what to do in case of an incident. Why is this important? Because if you remember, 80% of incidences happen because of human error. So the humans have to know that there's an incident response plan in place. They need to know that this is what we need to do if in case of an incident. Cybersecurity is not the responsibility of just the IT team and just the cybersecurity team. It is the responsibility of everyone in the organization. When you socialize the charter or the CSIRT information, you're making sure that people know what to do during an incident or the people they can go talk to, as well as who are the people that can go and talk to the press. If an incident happens, there's typically a request from the entire organization to say, no one talk to the press, no one talk to social media, because that can tend to complicate things. Okay? So these are all the things that are in association with the incident response plan. It's like you're essentially your guidance star. Brendan, it's not exactly a gag order. Instead, I would call it like a protection mechanism. Why do I say that? Because your company, if it had an incident, well, then they need to be very careful about how they communicate to the public, not just like on social media or to the press, but they also need to be careful on how they frame it because that could cost a lot more money. And if an employee speaks out of turn or gives bad information, that employee could get into legal trouble as well. It's also a safety thing. If an employee publicly puts themselves out there, well, then they could be the next target of another cyber attack, or maybe they could be doxxed. If you don't know what doxing is, it's when someone finds out your address, every information about you, and they call the SWAT team on you for whatever reason. All right, let's move forward here. Got a couple more slides to go. Next, we have detection and analysis. So this is the entire process of identifying that an incident has occurred, verifying it, understanding the scope of the incident, and then starting an investigation to kind of dig into it. Okay. So the entire concept here is centered around detection, which is identifying unusual or suspicious activity. That is one of the most important phases, because you can't say that an incident is an incident without detecting it first. Well, how do you do that? You identify an incident by you detect it by using IDSs, which is intrusion detection system, or an antivirus, or an endpoint detection and response system. These are all tools that can be used to know if an event is actually worthy to be called an incident or not. Now, more often than not, you'll send this up to a SIEM, which again is a security information and event monitoring tool that will enable you to understand how severe is this actual threat? Is it credible or not? Now, when we go into this phase, this gets into the analysis phase, where we're investigating and trying to understand the activity's impact if it's fully vetted, and then we try to understand if it's something that we need to communicate up the chain, if we need to go ahead and pull the red flag and say, hey, we're having an actual incident. These are all in correlation to the analysis, and then it would inform the IOCs. As a reminder, IOC stands for indicator of compromise. That means that we have actual clues and artifacts that show that a system has fully been breached. It's an indicator of an actual compromise itself. Let's see. So let's kind of break down these little phases here. So the first phase is detection. So you have things like SIEM, EDR, and AV, which is an antivirus or intrusion detection system, ADS. They're the monitoring tools that are able to kind of like find out and detect if there's something. And then there is an alert that is triggered. Now, that alert triage in question would be something like a log or something like a firewall that says, hey, I noticed that this IP ad is trying to access this and they're not supposed to, or something such as an MSSP. So an MSSP, if we go back up, yeah, it stands for Managed Security Service Provider. So this would be like a third party or an external cybersecurity team that can do alerts, and that essentially takes care of this for you. Now, keep in mind, when we're talking about alerts here, the alerts they're not neither good or bad. That doesn't mean that they're an actual attack, but it just means that they must be verified and triaged. Triage is a fancy term for saying it must be looked into. Can a technical leader or incident response team represent the incident response manager? Yeah, Ahmed, sometimes the incident response manager would be the technical lead or the incident response. Yeah, essentially, yes. It depends on how you set it up. Then we go into investigation. So now in, excuse me, in the investigation phase, well, then they're looking into the actual incident and they're doing analysis, they're doing triage, they're saying, hey, we need to look into this to find out if this is credible or not. We need to make sure that we know full or not if this needs to be looked into. If it does, well, then we go through forensic analysis where they go through the IOCs and then they see any of the attacker techniques that were used, followed by actual analysis. Now, the analysis itself is determining who, what, when, where, why. We're trying to understand the actual threat itself, and then we're trying to kind of like gather additional information on that. What we then do is a root cause analysis. So we're trying to understand, okay, we understand that there's been a breach. Well, then how did that breach happen? Where is the actual weakness? What allowed this attack to take place? Was it a phishing email? Was it an unpatched system? Was it a third-party application that had an issue? So those are that's what happened in root cause, is trying to answer the TTPs. If you remember, TTP stands for techniques, tactics, techniques, and procedures that the threat actor used in order to gain access to our system. Then we go into threat intelligence, where we're using data feeds and known threat actor behavior to inform the analysis. With threat intelligence, we already know a lot of the threat actors' patterns, what tools they've used, different systems that they've used, and different trends. When we correlate those trends to potentially like the root cause analysis or overall analysis, we can then have a better picture or an idea of what exactly happened. That is correct, Pete. The 5 W's of solving the problem. What, when, where, why, who. Who, what, when, where, why. Now, when it comes to detection and analysis, as you can imagine, there is a lot of correlation that takes place because you're taking up a lot of data. So with data correlation, you're trying to match the alerts from different systems or different softwares that you're using to kind of give you a full picture of what exactly happens. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about event correlation. Keep in mind, when you're a company, you may have multiple different systems that have multiple different alerting tools that are looking at multiple different resources or vectors. So you want to correlate those all together to understand what exactly does that mean. Well, in this case, it could be something as, hey, there have been a lot of failed logins, and then there was a successful login, then there was a password change, then there was a new user account, then that new user account created an admin account. That admin account added an IP address onto the firewalls. And so you correlate all these events to kind of get a clear picture of, hey, what is this threat actor trying to do? When you do that, it gives you some context into what exactly they're going after. Now, after you've done this, you go into incident classification. What does this mean? Well, then you can say, all right, we know that there's been an incident, but the incident, it was a data breach because they stole data, or it was malware because they're trying to infect our systems, or it was a website defacement attack where they're trying to say something on our website by changing a wallpaper or have you. You categorize that accordingly, and then you list out the severity. The severity would be, what is the impact of all of this, okay? Is it going to be huge? Is it going to add additional risk? Is there going to be a huge dollar amount associated with it? All of these are classifications that you need to keep in mind when you're doing incident response. And then obviously, as most important, is documentation and communication. You always want to document what exactly happened, who did the findings, what were the observations, what was the analysis, what is it classified as, and then you need to communicate that to the appropriate stakeholders. As a reminder, this means C-suite, this means legal, HR, PR team, and regulators. Regulators are the people in charge of making sure that you're staying compliant with all the laws and standards of your country and your industry. So one of the first steps that you want to do is you want to identify, and then you need to detect and analyze that entire process. Now, that entire process involves making sure you're asking who identified the incident, who reported it, which device was it on, well, how was it discovered, what is the impact of it. That's probably one of the biggest things you'll hear from C-suite. They'll say, how big of an issue is it? How much is it going to cost? When can we fix it? So you need to come prepared to answer these questions if you're the one speaking to the stakeholders. One of the things I remember was there was an incident that happened, and then I brought all this information to the C-suite. I was talking to the CISO. He said, hey, give me a summary of the incident. I said, well, this is what happened. It started at this time. This person found out what it was. This is the numerical value that we anticipate in damages. This is how we resolved it. And then he asked me, why did this happen? And I'll always remember that, because when a CISO asks you the why question, it really digs deep. They're trying to understand the core of it. And luckily, I had a vague answer. I said something along the lines of, there was a pre-existing weakness that we had mitigated, that we had accepted because of I think I said something along the lines of, there was a risk that we accepted due to the likelihood of it happening being really low. And it's documented, it's listed here. I will send you a full report. And so he was satisfied with that answer, but I was lucky that I had somewhat prepared for that and that I had other teams ready to like respond more in depth. We were able to send him the information and everything, but that's kind of like the things you need to expect when it comes to incident response. After incident detection and analysis comes containment, eradication, and recovery. So I'm going to kind of like go through this kind of quickly because we have other things we need to run through. But in essence, the containment portion means that you're stopping the threat from spreading. That is isolation. You're isolating it. Okay. So you're stopping the attack. And then eradication is you're removing the threat entirely, meaning you're removing the attacker or you're removing the tool, whether it's malware or not. And recovery means that you're restoring all your systems and operations back to normal, meaning that it's a clean slate, it's back to baseline again. Excuse me. So all of these are really, really important. These are critical because that means that you can say that you've accomplished all the things that you need to do to bring your business back online. That's one of the most important pieces. Now, there are different levels to this. One of them is short-term containment. In essence, that just means that you're acting fast to stop further damage. A very simple example is just unplugging the devices or disconnecting them from the network. That's considered a short-term containment. Now, a long-term containment on the other hand is something like patching the systems, removing any backdoors, or rerouting the traffic to be in a clean infrastructure. Now, a step that kind of comes in between that is system backup and forensics. That means making a full backup and to the affected systems, as well as preserve evidence for investigation and lawsuits. So this is, in essence, containment. Now, when we're talking about eradication, on the other hand, I think we talked about this already. When we're talking about eradication, on the other hand, it can have multiple steps. So eradication is essentially removing malware or removing the threat entirely. Okay, that just means getting rid of it completely. Now, it can be a little difficult because you have to identify it, you have to find out where all the malware lives. This is continuously monitoring to find that out. So what does eradication actually look like? Well, it could be the actual removal of the malware itself. This is why antiviruses are such an important thing. That's why a lot of security professionals, they say, well, an antivirus overall is better than no antivirus at all, okay? Something else that you can do to remove the eradication is to just patch the vulnerability. That means, if you remember, if there is an issue out there or an existing weakness in a system, what will most likely happen is the company, will use Windows as an example, they will release a patch. That patch will automatically upgrade or update the operating system to get rid of that vulnerability overall, and that eradicates that. Something else you can do is account remediation. Account remediation in this case, when it comes to eradication, is resetting the password or disabling any sort of account. This is one of the most simple things you can do if you find out that your account has been hacked. If your account has been hacked, one of the first things you do is you reset your password. When you reset your password, well, then it takes away the power that hacker had immediately. Something else you can do is you can rebuild infected devices. You can validate systems that are clean moving forward, that kind of stuff. So the eradication process is essentially asking, can compromised assets be hardened against similar attacks? Have compromised assets been completely sanitized? Are they good to go? Do we know that they're completely clean at this point? And then have we documented this? Has the CSIRT team documented this entire process and have all the vulnerabilities in this specific incident been addressed? These are all the things you want to keep in mind when it comes to eradication. Now, after eradication comes a really important phase, which is recovery. So, recovery is essentially where you have a goal to return your systems back to normal while ensuring that the threat is gone. Think of it as this: when you're recovering, you're continually checking to say, hey, did we recover completely? Did we get rid of the threat completely? Because we want to make sure that we aren't dealing with an APT. As a reminder, an APT stands for Advanced Persistent Threat. This tends to be a really well-funded and sophisticated long-term attack that is really good at hiding within a network and hiding within a system. If you remember, I talked about how the United States experienced an APT when they were attacked by Salt Typhoon, where they were able to infiltrate all of the really well-known telecommunication companies. And so we want to make sure that we've completely eradicated, completely gotten rid of all of those threats so that when we go into recovery phase, we're in a completely clean slate. That means we have a sanitary backup. A sanitary backup just means a clean, verified backup free of malware, free of any sort of threats. So this would fall under a couple categories. One of those is data restoration. So that means that you're restoring data from a verified backup. So if you remember, we talked about backups in the past, how you want to have multiple backups, whether it's incremental, whether it's full, or what have you. Those backups mean that they have not been impacted or affected, so you can restore from those verified backups. You can confirm that those backups are free of threats by doing what we call an integrity check. An integrity check is making sure that you scan it and go through a full review. This could be automated. Most likely will be done with a scan by a system saying, hey, we don't see any irregularities or any malware in here. It is a clean backup. And then you do a verification check to ensure that it's not reintroducing any malwares. It's very, very uncommon for I wouldn't say that it happens a lot of the time where threat actors go after the backups, because then if they do, if you back that system up, they'll build malware hiding in there. Excuse me, sorry. All right, then there's system rebuilding. System rebuilding is when you rebuild a compromised system from scratch. You clean the images completely. That means that you're reapplying security patches, you're reapplying any patches that were sent on the operating system, and you're validating that the configuration align with all your security policies. Because your security policies are your policies that protect your system. Infrastructure remediation, that just means that your firewall rules, your access control, your segmentation, they are all reviewed to make sure that they are as hardened as possible. And you include in those hardening steps the incident that just happened. If there was a weakness that you had in your infrastructure, well, then you're making sure that all of your new infrastructure are resistant to the weakness that caused that incident. Service restoration just means that you're bringing things back to normal, that your operating things are back to the way that they were meant to be. And then communication and notification just means that you're updating your stakeholders of the recovery process. So when LastPass was breached, they would send out emails saying, hey, just so you know, we had a breach. However, this is what we did. We'll keep you updated on our processes. And then they will keep notifying customers and any regulators or law enforcement as required to make sure that they are being compliant because they're publicly traded. Now, this is where your BCP comes in. If we talked about this minutely in a class before, but BCP stands for Business Continuity Plan. Essentially, it just ensures that you have backup strategies in place to make sure that your business is still able to function. It's like a contingency plan that gets activated in case of a security incident or a major crisis. The last one is monitoring and validation. This just means that you're continually monitoring for any continued threats, including looking for suspicious behavior, and you're doing vulnerability scans to validate that your system is still healthy. This is just making sure that you're continuously monitoring and making sure that there aren't still some threats that could impact you. Post-incident activity. So we talked about this briefly, but a post-incident activity is, let's say at this point in time, you detected the incident, you were able to validate that as an actual incident, and then you realized, okay, we need to address it. So you go ahead and you contain it, you eradicate it, and then you recover your entire network. So now at this point, the incident is almost done. It's not done yet, it's almost done. One of the first things you have to do is you have to schedule a lessons learned. Now, there are different ways you can call this. Sometimes it's called a lesson learned. It can be called a post-mortem. It can be called a retro. All of these are post-incident activities with the goal to review what happened, to document what happened, because documenting should have happened throughout, but in case it hasn't, you want to make sure to review it. And then you want to do a lessons learned to strengthen the defenses so that in the future, you don't experience it. Now, a lesson learned is a formal process. It should be noted that it's essentially a formal review of the incident and how you responded to it. And you typically do what we call a RCA. I think that's in here somewhere. Yeah. RCA stands for root cause analysis. This is where you investigate to find out how exactly this breach happened so that you can keep that from happening in the future. Now, what we typically recommend is not to wait longer than 2 weeks in order to do the lessons learned, because you want to make sure it's still fresh in people's mind. Who are the people you want to include? Well, you want to include the CSIRT team, so the Cybersecurity Incident Response team. All of those members, you want to include stakeholders, you want to include CISOs, CEOs, you want to make sure that you're involving all the relevant departments. And so the idea here, keep this in mind, is not to point fingers and point blame. Sometimes in lessons learned, people say, well, this department should have done that, or this part should have done that. Whenever I do a lessons learned, I always start it with, this is not a blame game. We're not here to point fingers. We're here to talk about the facts of what happened and then see what we can improve. And then we can have a discussion on different ways different team members can improve as a whole. We're not here to put someone under the bus. We're here to work together cross-functionally to protect our entire company overall. So the questions that you want to answer during a postmortem or a lessons learned are very simple. It's asking what happened and when, who discovered it, what was the actual incident itself, who responded and how, what worked well, what didn't, what could have been done differently, what were our bottlenecks? If you remember, what are the things that kept us from being able to accomplish XYZ? A very common bottleneck that I've seen is lagged time from the decision maker. That means that the decision maker, whether it's CEO, C-suite, CISO, what have you, they were unavailable to make really key decisions regarding the incident. And so we weren't able to respond in time. That is one of the main reasons why backups need to happen and need to be there. Of course, one of the biggest questions that people want answered is what was the root cause and how do we prevent it? So that's one of the biggest things that we need to talk, that will most likely come out of the lessons learned. So when it comes to incident response, what are some of the common pitfalls or common things that people do incorrectly? I can tell you right now that the majority of the answers here are all because no one did enough proactive work. People may get annoyed with you as a cybersecurity professional when you say, hey, I think we need to put time, energy, and money into proactively protecting this system. That means inefficient hardening. We want to make sure that we're prioritizing putting all of the right security controls on our critical assets. We want to make sure that we are not rushing to deploy systems without making sure they have the right configuration, and that we make sure that we're updating passwords properly, that we're not keeping port, HTTP or telnet ports open on some network sections. These are all things that could have been prevented if they had taken the proactive time to do security checks. So I can tell you right now that the majorities are associated with that. Inefficient hardening, that's one. Inefficient logging, so that's if you're logging way too much, they don't log all activities. Maybe they're logging the incorrect activities. When you're not logging the right activities, you're essentially doing what I call like flying blind, right? That means that you don't exactly know or unaware if an incident is taking place. The more awareness you have and the more monitoring you have on your network, the better your blue team is going to be able to respond in the case of an incident. Now, this can be like kind of like on the other side of it, you could have what we call over alerting. If you're overly cautious and you're doing too many alerts, you're having too much noise, well, then this can cause what we call alert fatigue, meaning that we're seeing so many alerts at this point that we're not able to prioritize them well, which means we can miss some real threats. This is where a SIEM can come in and kind of like dwindle it down to the most important things. This is where orchestration and automation can come in, where it actually make things a lot more simpler so we know exactly what we're trying to look for. I think for the sake of time, I'll let you all review these on your own. But like I said, a lot of them are associated with not proactively setting the right security steps in place. All right, root cause analysis and threat hunting. So root cause. What is the original issue that made the incident take place? Well, then, if you're trying to understand that root cause analysis, one of the first things you need to do is you need to understand the incident itself. We need to know when exactly it happened. We need to know what systems they were targeting, and then we need to know what threat actor was after. Once we understand what the incident is, well, then we can find some of the more immediate causes. We can ask ourselves what directly triggered the breach. This is what identifying immediate causes are. So the root cause analysis is aiming to identify the immediate cause itself. After you identify the immediate cause, you can identify contributing factors. So maybe we found out the initial weakness, but were there other surrounding weaknesses that could have made it a little easier? For example, human error. Was human error a factor in that breach? Was there a misconfiguration that we missed? Was there a security control that we didn't put in place? These are the questions that kind of help answer the root analysis cause. Now, this is all just like things that we're reviewing, right? Once we go into the technical piece, we can use investigative techniques. These investigative techniques mean, okay, we're going to take a step further and actually dig more into it. That means we're going to do a lot of logs. We're going to do some forensic imaging to find out what exactly happened. We're going to do interviews, meet with individuals who were directly associated with these. And then once we go through that, we can hear from them what exactly happened. That's what investigative techniques means. After that, we determine corrective actions, followed by implementing preventative measures, and then continuous improvement. The core thing I want everyone to remember when it comes to root cause analysis is you're using different tools to identify what the actual weakness is, and you look around that weakness to find out if there's any other weaknesses associated with it. Now, when it comes to threat hunting, in very simple terms, it is the goal is to find stealthy or advanced attackers before they can cause the damage. So that means proactively finding out what exactly those threats are and then proactively bypass it. Threat hunting is active. Threat hunting means that you have an actual team of researchers trying to look for unusual behavior, trying to look for abnormalities that go against your network baseline. The idea here is leveraging threat intelligence feeds and kind of like working with a lot of different tools to make sure that you're finding those threats before they actually happen. Well, why is that important? You can detect those threats early, which means you can protect against them. You are reducing the time to respond, and then you're able to kind of like refine your incident response plan according to the threats that you found. BlackRock taking proactive measures to ensure incidents do not happen in the first place. Yes, BlackRock is really well known for that. Ben Long says, is threat hunting is like pen testing? Kind of, sort of. Threat hunting is more like doing a lot more scanning, doing a lot more research, going on forums undercover to see like if your company is mentioned anywhere. Pen testing is actually trying to hack yourself. So you're trying to create the threats or kind of extort them. Threat hunting is where you're looking for them. Good question, Ben. I think this is pretty self-explanatory. Let me see. I think we have just a couple more. Okay, training education. Yeah, all right. We can go through that. Okay, so if I were to summarize root cause analysis and threat hunting, root cause analysis is the process of looking backwards of what went wrong, finding out that key element that caused the incident, and then fixing it. Threat hunting looks forward to catch the next threat. It's looking at the next things that could be an issue for your organization. So when it comes to combining both of them, what they do is it improves your systems, your tools, your trainings, your response time. It's beneficial overall, but it requires you to put time, energy, and resources in order to do that. Speaking of time, energy, and resources, one of the best things to do when it comes to incident response is training. The concept of regular training and testing is important because it ensures that your team knows what to do when an incident happens and how to respond to it effectively. If your team does not stay trained on the best way to do things and doesn't continually test it, it makes them less ready and less capable to respond to those incidences once they do happen. So why it matters. 95% of the breaches are caused by human error. I said 80, IBM says 95, okay? But the staff must know how to recognize and report things such like a phishing email, a scam, suspicious behavior, or any sort of activity that could be deemed any sort of activity that could be deemed a threat to the organization. Okay. 1 second. There we go. Now, trained users act as early warning sensors. I always say that humans are the very first firewall when it comes to cybersecurity. So when you train them, well, then they actually can protect or prevent incidences from taking place. This is why every single company has a cybersecurity training program that people have to do on a yearly basis, like go through the videos, because that literally helps protect them. A lot of employees will click through it and they'll say, oh, I just want to go through it. But there is a correlation between companies that have employees that put time and energy into actually being cybersecurity minded and oriented and cultured to the reduction of incidences that happen. It's not a great margin, but it's still a margin. A lot of CISOs don't like putting a lot of time, money, and energy into training. However, it is something that is important for a lot of companies. All right. So then we might be talking about, well, who needs to get trained? Well, the people that need to get trained, first of all, the training that they need to get need to be on teaching secure behaviors, such as like not using USBs you find outside, making sure to badge everyone in, phishing emails. These are all examples of good training. And then the concept of who needs to get trained, it's everyone. CSIRT team, IT, executives, even customers. If you are a B2B customer, meaning that let's say you're a SaaS company, you sell like a website making tool, and then you need to train those customers on how to protect their website. Those are all types of trainings that need to happen. Then there's incident handlers like log reading, forensics, honeypot analysis, that kind of stuff. All right, what exactly does testing mean? So when it comes to testing, we're talking about tabletop exercises, like mentioned before. The tabletop exercise is, what if a ransomware attack happens on the HR system? What do you do? Talk me through it. And then it's good because then you get to test their processes, their like thinking, and and essential like what they know to do. Then you also have simulations where you simulate an attack. There's red team exercises. This could be where you engage a pen test team in order to do this. These are really, really fun. I was part of a pen testing team that also did this, and I have to say, it's really, really, it's a good time. Ethical hackers try to break in, and then the blue team is being tested to see how they defend against it in real time. It does take some acting, folks. I had to put on my acting hat and pretend like I was an employee, which is really, which is a cool thing. So these two things are kind of like synonymous. All right, let's answer some questions. So, quiz red. We are right on time. Question number 1. An analyst receives a SIM alert triggered by an impossible travel rule. However, the alert lacks enough detail to determine if it's a real threat. What is the analyst's most appropriate next step? So the impossible travel rule means like the employee an hour ago was in New York, but then all of a sudden they're logging in from Turkey. And survey says, everyone says C, initiate digital forensic to collect more detail. That is correct. When you don't have enough information or enough details, the first step is to seek additional details. Well done. Question number 2. A security analyst is preparing for an upcoming incident simulation. She wants to ensure your team knows how to respond to a ransomware attack with clear step-by-step actions. What document should she refer to? A, B, C, or D? Respond to a ransomware attack. Everyone says C again. That is correct. Keep in mind, a playbook is specific to an attack. It's one specific attack. The incident response plan tends to be a lot broader. Question number 3. Your organization is developing an incident response plan during a simulated breach. Confusion arises about who should notify execs and who's responsible. Which of the following IRP steps was likely overlooked? A, B, C, or D? Everyone is saying C again. That is correct. Knowing who is going to go tell the executive team should have been done proactively. Question number 4. During an active cyber attack, your incident response team changes all user passwords in AD immediately after discovering the breach. Hours later, unusual activity resumes. The analysts find the threat actor still has access. Which of the following best explains what went wrong in the response process? A, B, C, or D? And everyone says C again. That is correct. So that means that eradication happened before the containment. Containment needs to happen first to make sure it doesn't continue. Because this scenario right here, I have experienced this, and this is a nightmare. It is a nightmare once you think that you eradicate it, but it has not. So that's why it's really important. And last but not least question, we'll see if it's C again. Which of the following best describes the purpose of the analysis stage in the detection and analysis phase of incident response? A, B, C, or D? Everyone chiming in, and everyone is saying C. That is correct. To investigate alerts, identify the root cause, and determine the scope of the incident. Great job, everyone. So, if I were to conclude the entire process when it comes to incident response, I would say this. So, you need to have a well-planned and a well-tested incident response process because it's beneficial to know what to do when an incident takes place, who to communicate to, what your roles and responsibilities are. Once you know that, you're minimizing the damage, you're minimizing the time it takes to respond, and you're able to bring your systems back online quicker. When you do this, keep in mind that the post-event activities, such as the lesson learned process, is really important, because then you can build additional resilience to other cybersecurity threats similar to the one that you did. Because hypothetically, once you do the lessons learned, you know the weaknesses, you know things you can improve, you improve them so that it doesn't happen again. A lot of companies do not follow through with those steps, and that's difficult, because then they get repeated attacks like that. The fact that they don't just means that they just get really, really lucky. All right, I think I will say this. This is my final thought. So when it comes to incident management, it's not just about fixing the problem in and of itself. Yes, that's very important. It's one of the key elements of incident response. However, it's also about not letting that happen again. That means doing all the proactive steps after the incident by learning, improving, and being ready to protect your critical assets, by identifying them, by making sure the right controls are in place, because that is one of the best ways to protect yourself and your organization. All right. I think everyone did a great